Okay. All right, we are live now on YouTube, and I'll start recording this meeting. There are people coming in, and let us start today our lecture. First of all, welcome everyone. Again, we have plenty jurisdictions represented. We have non-Masons participants. We have boys and girls also participating, and we are all eager to listen to very interesting lecture that Bob always delivers for us very generously. I will remind you that there are a few rules that we want all to follow. That is that we don't discuss politics or religion, or we don't discuss jurisdictional issues. This is only academic meeting to learn more about Freemasonry around the world, to listen to each other's opinions, how hard it might be. It's never been hard, listening to Bob especially. So let's keep those very simple rules in mind while when we make any statement or discuss anything, just to keep the harmony in the group. And these recordings are watched all the time from many interested people who really want to see what Freemasonry is all about, and they spend hours watching the videos that are posted on the YouTube channel of Grand Lodge of Georgia. If any of you have not shared emails, you can do so in the chat room, so we can put you on the mailing list. I've seen several new faces, let's say, and to keep you updated, just give us the email so you know exactly what we will be discussing on the next lecture and when it will be happening and with whom. Um, with the ones that already shared, you don't need to post it unless you want to share your emails or your personal details to the new persons here. Chat is open, you can post anything. You can save the chat so later you can read them, read the messages. So there we are. This is the lecture number 9, and today's lecture is very interesting and intriguing. I tried to search some links to this topic. The topic is proposed by Brother Bob himself. He's the author of this topic, not only the lecture. So the topic is one man's attempt at Masonic immortality, in the USA. It says USA. So without any comment on the topic, because I couldn't get too much about it, it is my pleasure to give the floor to Brother Robert Cooper. Floor is yours. I will mute now everyone, and let's listen to the lecture. Prepare your notebooks or pens uh, to prepare your questions if you have any. And at the end of the meeting, almost everyone will have the possibility to ask his or her question. So, Brother Bob, having said that, I will mute now everyone and unmute you. So, floor is yours, and the recording is on. We are live.
Okay, well, good evening, everyone. Good evening, my time anyway. Thanks for tuning in again. Tonight's presentation is very different, I think, from anything that I've given previously. And it's a very image-heavy presentation. So this has always been a PowerPoint presentation normally given in a tiled lodge. So some elements have been removed, but even so, I think you'll find it very interesting. It concerns a very particular place and a particular individual, and it's not terribly old. So unlike my ramblings about the late 16th century, we're coming forward 250 odd years or more. So this thing that we're going to talk about takes place in America. So what I'm going to do is we're going to start the PowerPoint presentation. Oh yeah, so you're going to have to connect me, David. You're going to have to release me.
No, you're fine. You just hit the share screen button, and it should work.
No,
No
it
need for
says
permission.
no. It says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Wow,
So I
how
can't share
strange.
this.
Let me allow record,
Yep.
rename, put in waiting room. No, I haven't done that.
I've got the green button, but
So it doesn't work.
no, it just says host has disabled participant screen sharing. So you have to.
No, I haven't. Okay, multiple sessions simultaneously at once. Okay. Who can share? Okay, sorry, someone mixed with the team member, I guess. Okay, only who can start sharing when someone else is sharing? All participants. Okay, only host. Okay, now it should work. Try, please.
Okay,
That's
there
it.
we go.
Yeah, yours. That's it. That's it.
Okay, so as I say, this is quite an image-heavy presentation. It's been a little while since I've actually sort of done this presentation, so forgive me if it's not as smooth as it would be normally. I've taken a little while to try and catch up on it. It was written a little while ago, and I have updated it. But as I say, we'll go through it. I hope you find it interesting. But this can only be told really using images. And I have to say, one of the big problems that historians like me have is that very, very few people write what Freemasonry means to them as an individual. So we do have a few exceptions, people perhaps like Rudyard Kipling, Robert Burns, um, perhaps Mark Twain. But generally speaking, individuals don't say very much. And even the ones I've mentioned who do make some comment, are usually making the comment about Freemasonry during the course of saying something else. So people like Walter Scott would mention it in his novels. Rudyard Kipling made poems out of it. Very few would write in their diaries what Freemasonry meant to them as an individual. So it's very difficult then to find out what Freemasonry means to people in general. And that means it's very difficult for people like me to say what Freemasonry is when I'm asked the question by people who are not Masons. So I can say what it means to me, but I don't know what any other Mason generally thinks Freemasonry is about. What we're going to talk about tonight is one person who actually took the idea one step further than just talking about Freemasonry. He made it into 3 dimensions. And it's that guy that we want to talk about, and we can glean from what he did, at least what he thought about Freemasonry, even better, I think, than perhaps somebody writing about it. And the person involved, as I say, was one man who decided to erect a structure and say something about that structure. And then he was using that as a monument or a memorial, not only to himself, particularly himself, but it was also a memorial to his family. And this takes place, this whole thing takes place in the United States, in a rather unusual part of the world. But the individual is a chap called John McMillin, which, as you can imagine, is a Scot, first generation Scot in the United States, in Indiana, in fact. And he died in 1936, which isn't all that terribly long ago. So as I say, it's much more up to date than previous presentations. He was obviously quite clever. He was a lawyer. He got a degree in law at the university, and he moved to Washington State, what is now Washington State, where he got a job with the Tacoma Limestone Company in Tacoma, Washington. And he was a bit disreputable, I have to say. What he did was he traveled almost as far north as it's possible to go in the United States. And as you can see from this map, particularly we're talking about an island off the west coast of Washington State in the far north. And as you can see that line, the straight line, that's Canada to the north and United States to the south. So this is way north, and in fact, in some ways, this American territory is actually above parts of Canada. Canada on the left-hand side, Victoria, you can see, is down in the left-hand corner there. So the place that this all takes place is in the what are called the San Juan Islands, and where the little marker that you can see on the map in particular is where we're going to look at a specific structure. And the place is called Roach Harbour. Now, McMillin, let me see if I can remind me, McMillin, as I say, was a little bit disreputable, although he got this job with the Tacoma Limestone Company. He was charged with finding limestone deposits. The United States of America was undergoing a building boom. Limestone was necessary to build buildings. And what he did was, when he heard rumors of a very big limestone deposit on this island in the San Juans. And he went there and discovered there was indeed a limestone deposit, but the owners didn't realize just how enormous it was, and he was able to buy them out. Instead of buying them out on behalf of his employer, he bought them out in his own name. So he borrowed money and bought out these two owners, and he got it for a song compared to ultimately its value. So as I say, he was a bit disreputable. Not only did he con the two owners, but he conned his employer, because he actually resigned from the company before he bought the property. So he obviously knew that this was going to be a real money maker, and indeed it did turn out to be just that. It was a huge money-making operation, as it turned out. So we know quite a lot about the man. We're in an age where we're talking the 19th and 20th centuries, where records are very good, and there's not, unlike previous presentations where I kept saying, well, we know a little bit about him. In fact, we know a lot about this particular individual. He was, as you can see here, he was a Freemason. He was a member of the Bellingham Bay Lodge number 44 in Washington State. And you go back to the map and you can see Bellingham is on the right-hand side, on the mainland, on the right-hand side, and that's where the lodge was. So he was a Freemason, and after he had bought this property, and this is the actual record of him in the Grand Lodge of Washington's records. So you can see he was an entered apprentice, passed and raised. So he was very much a Freemason for a large part of his life, not all of it, but a large part of his life, 30 years. And not only was he a Freemason, but his son, Fred McMillin, was also a Freemason and joined it exactly the same time as his father. But he predeceased his father. He died more than 10 years before his father died. So here you have a father and son, and you can see that the son here is described, his occupation as the vice president of a lime company, a limestone company. So he was very involved in the business. So you've got a Masonic family, if you like, who are also very much involved in um, uh, a business, entrepreneurs, very important in the building industry of the United States. And the limestone deposit that he bought, it turned out to be the largest limestone deposit in that part of the world. And it, as I say, it made a lot of money for this individual. So what McMillin did when he was getting older, he had a son, another son, Paul. Paul was not interested terribly much in Freemasonry, and in fact, there's no record of this son, Paul, becoming a Freemason. But towards the end of his life, McMillin was very, very rich indeed, a multimillionaire, and he began to indulge himself as an older man. He started doing all sorts of very unusual things on these islands. The one in particular, San Juan Island itself, he started importing exotic animals, for example, animals really that didn't have any right to live in that very temperate climate. But the one thing that we're interested in here tonight is his interest in Freemasonry, and that's why it's called Masonry Made Manifest, was that he decided that he was going to do something quite unique. And you can see that this is the structure we're now going to talk about. It's typically called McMillin's Mausoleum, but there is a lot more to this structure than just being a mausoleum. It sits on a grassy knoll deep in the forest on that island, not far from Roach Harbour. I mean, it's walking distance actually, but it's in the forest. It's not well known. The San Juan Islands are quite remote anyway. It takes a couple of ferries to get there. So this is a place you really want to go to. It's not something you're going to stumble over by accident. So although it's a tourist destination, most of the tourists, or a lot of the tourists, I should say, arrive there by sailboat. It's a lovely destination in the summer for the sailboats, but it's pretty quiet in the winter. And for whatever reason, I've ended up there several times in the winter, and I've never been there during the tourist season, if you like. So it's always been very quiet when I've been there. Hardly anybody ever around apart from the odd local person, but no tourists, which for the purposes of taking photographs has been ideal. So this is what we're going to discuss tonight. This structure that's overlooks the sea, sits on this grassy knoll overlooking the sea. The surrounding area now is heavily overgrown, but at one time the view to the sea was quite clear. It was not obscured by all the trees that you can see growing around here. So although it's changed from McMillin's time, it's only changed because the undergrowth has been allowed to grow, and of course the trees have grown very tall since he died. So let's just look at what the structure is. And what I'm trying to do with these images is take you on a virtual tour. I now realize it probably would have been better if I had done this as a video, but I'm not a video person, I'm a stills cameraman. So these are images as I take. Maybe, if I make it back there, I will start videoing rather than doing it this way. But you'll see that this is the sort of the first approach. And it's important to realize that what McMillin has done is everything he's done is deliberate, and it's done with an intent to make something manifest that was in his mind. So the initial two steps are necessary because of what comes later. So the first the first two steps to approach the structure are just there as a matter of necessity. They don't have anything symbolic or any significance to the structure. It's just that they are necessary to make the ground to lie suitably for what he then built. So these first two steps and the two pillars are not of any particular significance. It's what comes after that, these two steps, that are important. So once past the sort of entrance and into the structure, the first thing we discover, and as you can see, there's three steps, and the path then takes a right turn, and this path is, so you're walking along the path, you then have three steps between two pillars. The path then turns right to another two pillars, and so you can see here the furthest pillars nearest the trees are the two steps I talked about. The next two pillars are 3, the next two pillars are 5, and the next 5 steps between the two pillars, and then ultimately you get to the base of the structure, which is circular, and there are 7 steps from this path up to the flat base, the flat piece on the top of the structure. So to get there, you walk up 3 steps, 5 steps, and 7 steps, all in a right-handed turning position. And I'll show you a graphic later on that shows you this from above. In the middle of the structure, as you can see, there is a table and some chairs, which are in their own right significant, but we'll come to them in a minute. So that's the approach to the structure. 3, 5, and 7 steps. On the other side, from the 7 steps leading to the structure, you can see that the ground is quite level. What McMillin did was he actually excavated the land on the right-hand side of this image in order that he could put 7 steps into his structure. And that's as a complete contrast. On the other side from the 7 steps, there is no approach at all. So the approach to this structure of 3, 5, and 7 steps is quite deliberate. He's not interested in anybody coming from the west side. You get into the structure from the east. Now, and you can see as another part of the structure, part of the table and the chairs in the middle. Now there is one further entrance, and this is almost certainly McMillin's own personal entrance. The other entrance is the Masonic entrance. This is McMillin's particular private entrance, if you like. And so unlike, unfortunately, that some of this is unfinished, but once we get a bit further on, I think you'll understand, hopefully make sense of what I'm trying to explain to you. So this is what you see when you're actually standing in the center of the plinth. You have 6 chairs and a table, and you'll see in the center, in slightly in the distance, you'll see a broken column. The seats are marked, they're carved with the name of each of the McMillin family, including his wife, daughter, his 2 sons, and of course himself, and one other who was an infant who died very, very young. And it's rather macabre, but the intention was that each member of the family was to be buried under their own seat. So this in fact is a family crypt. This is a graveyard, as well as being a memorial to the family. And we'll describe that a little bit further in a second. So the text on McMillin's own chair reads as this. It reads, as you can see, that he was a 32nd degree Mason, a Knight Templar, a noble of the Mystic Shrine, a member of the Greek Alpha fraternity, I suspect from the University in Indiana, can't say for sure. And he describes his religion as being a Methodist, and he was by politics, he was a Republican, which is not surprising given his interest in making money. He died on the 28th of October, 1936. So that's his particular chair, the one of six that you saw in the image. So quite clearly, he is very keen to be remembered as being a Mason. You'll notice he's a Mason first, and he's a Republican last. So this is a kind of order of importance to McMillin himself. This is how he sees himself in order of importance. Knight Templar was second, and a Shriner was third. Everything else is next. So in other words, his Masonic life is the most important part of his life as far as he's concerned, in terms of how he sees his life by the time he gets to old age. So we can now begin to interpret what we have seen. I mean, we saw the winding staircase of 3, 5, and 7 steps. I think we all know what that is. But in the distance, this broken column, of course, has a great deal of resonance, particularly in the Freemasonry as practiced in the United States, and not so much in Europe. But the broken column with a weeping widow, death standing behind her, and as you can see, a broken column. So this is very clearly a reference to Freemasonry, as you can see from the image. And he's actually incorporated that into the structure. And we can show you that this is a very deliberate repetition of this particular symbolism in American Freemasonry. It's built like that. This broken column wasn't built as a column and then broken. It was built as a broken column. So here you can see the broken base and the part at the top. So this is a circular structure. And from this graphic, we can see that there is a total of 7 pillars, and the broken one is on the left-hand side, number 1. Here you can see on the right-hand side the way you approach it, with 3 steps, 5 steps, and then 7 steps in a slightly winding configuration, with McMillin's own personal entrance at the bottom here. And there's, as I say, 6 chairs around the central table. Now this, somebody suggested that this may represent something like the Knights of the Round Table. Well, that's not impossible, although there was a lot more than just 6 Knights of the Round Table, but nevertheless, it's an indication. So when we're looking, and you can imagine this is like an image from above, we can now begin to see that this is a very deliberate structure, designed and paid for by this one particular individual who is trying to design something in particular. Not only is it a resting place for his family, but it's a last resting place for himself as a Freemason. So in other words, we think it's fairly clear now that what McMillin has actually done is he's actually recreated a Masonic lodge in 3 dimensions. And to make it even more emphatic, what he's done, he's placed the broken column in such a way that at the height of summer, at the summer solstice, when the sun is shining, it shines right through the broken column at number 1. So the rays of the sun actually shine through the broken column and fall on his chair. So at the height of summer, the 24th or thereabouts, the 24th of June, at the height of summer, um, his chair is illuminated by the sun. And so quite clearly, I think that not only does McMillan know full well what Masonic ritual is all about, what Masonic symbolism is all about, he knows what the winding staircase is all about. He wants to be remembered by anyone who goes there on or about the 24th of June as interpreting the sun, the sun shining upon him as a Freemason in death. So he's trying to create his own version of Masonic immortality. And I think he's probably succeeded in the sense that we can see from these images. Now, unfortunately, the building is incomplete. The intention was that on top of the pillars, there would be a dome, a copper dome, which he'd actually had made, and it got as far as the docks in Seattle, but it arrived after he died, and his son Paul was not going to spend any more money on finishing his father's folly, and so the dome was never put in place, which was a shame because the dome would have protected it far more from the elements and from the weather. So that you now have to try and imagine, and I'll need to try and get an artist to add a dome to this image, because I think we would see much more, well, as he intended it to be finished. The dome would have sat, as I say, on top. So not only was it unfinished, but the unfortunate thing is with the broken column, the broken part of the column, the upper part, it's a weight that's pulling stress. It's putting stress on the rest of the circular part of the circular parts sitting on the pillars, to the point where if something's not done, I think that side of the structure is going to collapse. Now, I don't know. I know it's a scheduled monument, scheduled by the United States government, a scheduled monument, but unlike certainly in Britain, a scheduled monument doesn't necessarily mean that the government's going to spend any money on it. It is, in fact, it simply means that it's noted in a national register as being of historic importance. As I say, if something's not done, unfortunately, that is going to be damaged. I do know that the Bellingham Lodge that he was a member of have a meeting here once a year in summer, an open air degree, they call it. What degree they do, I don't know. I'm not sure how this is tiled, frankly, because it is an actual initiation degree. But I'm not sure how it was tiled. I'd like to be there, but to see just exactly how it works. But a very, very important structure in that sense. Now, McMillan was buried under his chair, as was his son Fred and his wife. But I don't know about the rest of the family. So in many ways, whatever McMillan's intention was, he actually achieved it in the sense that he was interred in that very structure. The company, once Paul, his son, passed away, the company, the limestone company, was sold, and the new owners have allowed the structure to remain untouched. Although they own the land, the structure is left as it is. I don't know if they actually maintain it to any particular degree, but at least anybody who wants to go and see it can go and see it there. So hopefully you found that of some interest, brethren, a bit shorter than some of my longer ramblings, but I hope that you found it to be of some interest. And thanks very much for listening and watching on this occasion.
Thank you so much. It has been a history of one brother, and an interesting landmark he has left behind him as a legacy.
Mm.
So I would just remind the participants that in order to ask the questions, please use the right button, raise the hand, uh, and the floor will be yours. Before we will hear any questions, I received private requests for the presentation to be shared later on. Uh, it has been a delicious presentation, as one of the participants shared. So, any questions so far? Okay. Could you elaborate more on that was his kind of opinion perspective to reach out for Masonic immortality to some extent, as you put it that way. But you, as an historian, would you consider it properly complying the Masonic philosophy? How all is set up there? I guess some things are missing out, as you said in the presentation, because of the reasons. But whatever can be said publicly, what would you interpret it with a contemporary understanding of Freemasonry, one of the ways of immortalize yourself in that sense that he tried
Yeah.
to do?
Well, I think first and foremost, this is a guy who was super wealthy, and he could afford to indulge this particular fantasy, if you like. Um, People like you and I doubt would be able to do it. The circumstances um, were such that not only did he have the money, he had the land and he had the workforce working for him, because he used his own workforce to build this. So he was just one of these people who had all the things that were necessary for him to realize his dream, if you like. And clearly, the symbolism is all there, the winding staircase, etc. Um, Obviously, we couldn't. There's some things we couldn't discuss, and so I had to chop out a few of the images. Um, the one thing that doesn't fit is the table and the chairs. Um, the seven, the numerology, if you like, although I don't particularly like that word, the numerology, the 5, 7, the 3, 5, and 7 steps, the 7 columns, that all fits with Freemasonry, and of course the broken column fits very much so with the way the American symbolism at that time was being used. So all that fits. The puzzle is the table and the chairs. Whether or not, and as we know, because the dome is missing, whether or not there were still other things that he wanted to put into that building, and I suspect there were, he just never got it. He just never did it. And I mean, in some ways, that has there's an echo of that in Rosalind Chapel, if you like, because as you know, as we were discussing, when the father died, William St. Clair, who built the chapel, when he died, his son Oliver said, "Okay, that's my father's fantasy. I'm not going to spend any more money on it." Well, here we are, 700, 600 years later, it'd be 600, 500 years later, you have exactly the same thing happening, where McMillin has got quite far with his building, and his son Paul has said, when father died, I don't want any more to do with this. I'm not going to spend any more money on this, and he leaves it as it was. So I mean, in terms of father and son relationships, and father building a folly and son saying, I don't want any more to do with this. I mean, it's history repeating itself, isn't it? although on a completely different continent and hundreds of years out differently from that. So yeah, we do know that he clearly had a Masonic idea. Whether it would be our idea or not, I don't know. So yeah, so because this was one man's idea, there are no architectural drawings, as far as I know, that he may or had made, which would have given us an idea of what the complete structure would have been like. Was it meant to be enclosed? Was the space between the pillars to have a wall, perhaps walls inserted? Don't know. We simply don't know. But the fact remains is that when you see the graphic from above, I think you can certainly see that this is intended to be, symbolically at least, a symbolic representation of a Masonic lodge.
Okay, thank you. David wants to add something. David, floor is yours. Please unmute yourself, and he wants to add something he wrote.
I'm looking at the actual site, and apparently the chairs, which not only represent the members of the family, apart from one of them, they actually do contain the ashes of the deceased children, and they act as headstones.
Yes, yeah, that's slightly different. I mean, he intended the physical bodies to be interred there, and he was in fact buried there. The ashes are a bit different. I mean, I don't think he would be very happy to know that the ashes were put there. He intended the full physical remains to be buried there. And again, that's I think an example of, you know, once he died, nobody was interested in actually fulfilling what he had planned to do. So yeah, but yeah, so they were still used in a kind of way for what he intended. Yeah,
I think it might be of interest to tell everybody. Apparently, he built this in 1936. And he spent £30,000 in 1936, which must be well over £1 million in today's terms.
Yeah, he was a multi-millionaire, and so cost was not an issue. You know, he just, you know, he could do whatever he liked, and he did. So, yeah.
Thank you.
All right, Harun Sengul, you want to take the floor, or you want me to read the questions you put in the chat? Harun Sengul.
I'm with you. Thank you very much, David.
Go ahead, please.
I would like to ask one question, actually. It's about the reason why Brother McMillin was chosen as the subject of this presentation. Is it the way he, in a very extraordinary way, prepared his memorial to lead the way to his own apotheosis, or the art presented at his memorial, or there was anything more particular and unique that I missed? I think I just missed it myself, as he was a pioneer in the very northwest of US, clear to near Canada border. Limestone Company, made huge fortune, raised up the 32nd degree, left a unique memorial. And was there something else, like his altruism, or something very special to his contribution to Freemasonry in his own region, or maybe global scale? Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, how this happened, of course, one of my fascinations has been when you go to the United States and you go into a big bookstore there, you will find books on Italian Americans, books on Chinese Americans, Italian Americans, and so you've got, you know, places like Little Italy. Of course, the Irish are very well researched, but it's a very odd thing that a very large number of Scots went to America. and they're not an identifiable part of American culture. So there is no Little Scotland. There are no books that I know of on Scottish Americans in the same way, certainly, as being the Italian Americans, etc., etc. So it's always intrigued me as to what the Scots were doing in these rather far-flung parts of the world. And of course, the name McMillin caught my attention right away. But in terms of your actual question, what McMillin, what our interest here is, the fact that someone very unusually has actually made a very public statement about him being a Freemason, what a Freemason means to him, and what he wants to use Freemasonry for after he has died. So unlike anybody else that I know of anyway, he is using Freemasonry to make a statement to the world that not only did he want the world to know that he was a Freemason and thereby end up with some kind of immortality, but I believe he believes that Freemasonry has some kind of immortal memory to pass to everyone else. So it's almost as if he believes that Freemasonry contains a truth. It's a truth that's worthwhile ensuring carries on to future generations of Freemasons. And indeed, that seems to have succeeded, because merely by the fact that you have Freemasons from the mainland and indeed the islands, of course, but you have a Masonic gathering once a year in his virtual lodge to work an actual degree. So he's secured Masonic immortality for himself, because here we are getting on for 100 years later, actually using his virtual lodge to work degrees. And so let's be quite honest. I mean, the guy was probably a very prideful person. He was an attention seeker. And so he's using Freemasonry to promote himself. So there's definitely some vanity involved here. Now, whether he intended it or not, we can learn from that man's vanity, can't we? And we can see that what he did, because he had the money and the wherewithal to do it, is that the best way for someone to use Freemasonry to glorify himself? So even if he didn't intend it, he's giving us a message today in saying, look at yourself. He's taken out of Freemasonry what he wants. I suspect it's a message to us, asking us the question, is this what we want Freemasonry to be? He's used it. Did he abuse it? I don't know. And I think that's a question that he raises unconsciously. He raises that question for us to consider and answer. He's not here to explain these reasons, but he's left us something to discuss. And that's hopefully what we're trying to do tonight.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Hagul. Abraham, floor is yours.
Thank you, Brother David and Brother Bob, for another very enlightening presentation. So just some comments. I think the entire memorial that he created, the beauty about symbolism is that symbolism is interpreted differently by everyone who's observing it, and we can each draw our own observations and conclusions from what the symbology that was intended to portray. Interestingly enough, most of these symbolism would mean absolutely nothing to the profane, with the exception of his chair, which he clearly wanted the public to know that he was proud of his membership in the fraternity, and that it was of such significant importance to him So what I get from the presentation is that whether Mason or not, if a non-Mason were to visit that site, he might reflect and say, wow, this person was clearly proud of his involvement in the fraternity, and look what he's built here. Maybe it's something worthwhile for me to explore. And maybe it was his own way of kind of getting others to gain interest in the fraternity. That's my own take.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's an element of that. He certainly was very proud to be a Freemason, and he didn't mind telling people that he was a Freemason. My only problem, if this was a kind of advertisement for the craft, it's in a very obscure part of the world and very off the beaten track. And at the time, he owned the property, so it's private property. And so members of the public probably would wander in there by accident, but there certainly was not the intention, I don't think, for people to be able to go and see it. It's just that the subsequent owners didn't mind that. So yeah, so again, what his intentions were are very, very difficult to sort of equate. But you're right. I mean, he clearly was proud. And what is it they say about pride? It comes before a fall and all that. He's just a very interesting guy. I just wish we could have. There was some other things we could have discussed, but not to worry.
And the other thing I found of interest, I don't recall if it was on his Masonic record or his son's, that one of them was actually suspended for non-payment of dues and then reinstated. Being a man of wealth, it would make you wonder why that happened. That's
that was the son. I think the son was the kind of traveling salesman part of the business.
So he probably just let his dues slip his.
And the fact that he decided to get reinstated sort of shows that he was interested enough in Freemasonry to sort of get back into what we call good standing by paying whatever he had to pay. But unfortunately, like in some ways, he's left us this monument. But like so many Freemasons, there is no writing to explain his intentions. In some ways, of course, the research doesn't finish. I mean, we have looked at the structure. Perhaps locally there'll be family papers to be examined. Perhaps even things like his last will and testament. Who knows? All sorts of other sources really should be considered. But it's a part of the world that I can't get to from Scotland, just on a weekend kind of thing. So what you've got is basically what I know. And really, in many ways, Masonic research, it quite often just begins something and hopes that somebody else will pick up the baton and complete or continue the research. This is very much a case of that, hoping that someone locally will do a bit more digging and make a much fuller, gather a lot more information, make a much fuller picture of what's happening. I mean, for example, we don't know, perhaps the lodge on the mainland, the Bellingham Lodge, were they regular attenders at the lodge there? It's not, as I say, it's not the easiest place to get to even today, although you travel in a lot more comfortably nowadays. The ferry service is excellent, but I don't know if the father and the son were regular visitors to the lodge. So in other words, I don't know how dedicated a Freemason he and his son were, or whether this was really just about a vanity project and Freemasonry was the vehicle. Just don't know. At the moment, just don't know.
Yeah, and as far as the round table, I'm just as puzzled as you are, because the Knights of the Round Table vary from 12 to 150. So
Of course, it could be a miniaturized version of that ideal, I suppose.
Yeah.
Again, somebody perhaps more knowledgeable could be able to explain a circular table with people stationed around it. I don't know if there's anything in the Knight Templar degrees in the United States, which are quite different from here in Scotland, whether there's any reference to a circular table with seating around it. Again, I just don't know. I don't know what the ritual is. No, okay. So that seems to be something that is McMillin's own personal thing, giving a burial or intended burial place for all the family. But certainly, I mean, for me, the clincher is this the shaft of sunlight that comes through at the summer solstice and actually shines directly on his seat, not on anybody else's seat. It's on his seat. So this guy obviously loves himself a little bit, shall we say. But it works, you know, it works because, as I say, here's 100 years later, here we are, we're talking about this guy and what he was up to. So, you know, he got what he wanted. He got his immortality. Well, to date anyway, whether that's around in another 100 years is another matter. But so he got what he wanted. He got his plan worked.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it did.
Thank you. Norman, Brother Norman, floor is yours. Please unmute and
thank you. Thank you, David, and thank you, Bob. Again, very interesting lectures, nuggets of information you pull up for us. An observation and a question. One wonders whether McMillin's wife supported him as our wives support us today in our hobby, which can get quite prolific. That was the observation. Here's the question. The table and the chairs is obviously a puzzle. We don't quite know where this fits into what we expect when we enter a lodge from our Masonic experiences. I noticed that the columns were Doric. If he was really that finely dedicated to detail, we probably would have expected an Ionic, a Doric, and a Corinthian column figuring somewhere in that structure. Do you think that was a mistake or an omission, or is it just not the case in American Freemasonry? Thank you.
Yeah, we've got no way of knowing what his wife thought about all of this, but the fact that she stuck with him to the end sort of suggests that she was happy living a very comfortable life, and ultimately, therefore, probably supported him in his Masonic activities. You're right about the columns. I suspect that was down to kind of practicalities. Finding a stonemason who could carve the actual differences. I mean, when you get to Corinthian columns, they're incredibly intricate to carve in stone. So I think they probably simply took the shortcut and used simpler stones. I can't remember from the image, the symbolic image of the American thing. If I can find it quickly, I'll see if I can see if it shows in. No, it looks like it's a Corinthian column that's used in the in the symbol that I showed you. So yeah, I suspect, I can only think that it was simply down to the practical difficulties of reproducing each of the different styles. But again, we're probably never going to know for sure.
Well, thank you for that feedback.
Yeah.
It was
Okay.
interesting.
Yeah, interesting, interesting. Yeah. Anything else? I mean, can I say it begs the question. I don't know if any work has been done on this, but it kind of begs the question that we've been very, in some, I've got to be careful, but we can be very casual in understanding our own heritage. I mean, certainly in Masonic museums across the world, we've got collections of jewels and aprons and all that kind of stuff. But in the wider world, there is no census, as far as I know, of Masonic monuments, for example, that are visible to the public. Or even things that are dedicated to Freemasons. One example would be, I know that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of statues to Robert Burns scattered all over the world, quite often funded and directed by Freemasons, but there is no central register of those statues, for example. So, you know, I mean, when people say, you know, there's nothing left to do within Freemasonry, there is lots and lots we could do. Some of it is just a bit of a hard slog and perhaps isn't very sexy, but would be worthwhile. And so, for example, a catalogue of all the Burns statues across the world, I think would be interesting, because each statue would have a story behind it. But we don't know anything, for example, about that. And the same goes for other important people. We just, as Freemasons, we just don't seem to pay any real attention to that. Maybe this guy knew that if he didn't do something to commemorate himself, the Masons wouldn't pay any attention, and they would forget about him eventually. He didn't want to be forgotten, and it's as simple as that. And as I say, if that was his aim, he's achieved that aim.
Thank you. Aubrey Winnie, floor is yours. I'll help you with unmuting. Aubrey? Wait. Now you should be okay.
Right. Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Excellent. Well, Bob, excellent presentation. Very interesting. My question is, if I was a non-Mason and I walked up to that construction, would there be any indication in the area to tell me that it was Masonic? In other words, is there a sign that says this is so-and-so's?
Yeah, there is a plaque. There is a plaque placed there that gives you very brief information, and it does refer to the fact that he was a Freemason, of course, in addition to what he's written on the chair. But there's nothing in detail, you know. It doesn't. There's no explanation, and so I think that a Freemason wandering there, as I did, when I sort of walk up the path, I immediately notice, well, you know, 3 and 5 and 7. So as a Freemason, I, you know, immediately thought, oh, you know, there's very definitely some kind of Masonic connection here. But for a member of the public, probably not. And they would probably think, well, this is a bit weird, you know, it's a bit strange, you know, it doesn't make any particular sense. And I'm sure McMillin was quite deliberate in doing that. He didn't want the public to get to know too much, but he equally wanted to be sure that his fellow Freemasons understood what he was doing. So he was quite clever, I have to say. He was quite clever in doing what he did. But unfortunately, because it's incomplete, we don't know what his final intentions were. And that's a bit unfortunate. But there we go. But ultimately, the benefit of tonight's presentation is that it's much shorter than my usual long rambling. So You get
I
you get
wouldn't
you
say
get
that
off a
was a
bit.
benefit.
You get off lightly tonight. Put it that way.
Yeah,
Thank
we'll
you very
get our
much.
beer earlier, right? So, Aubrey, you're done. Can I mute
Yes,
you?
yes, thank you. Yes.
Okay. Gordon, floor is yours.
Bob, we love your usual long ramblings, but can I ask you what
Yes.
first piqued your interest with this subject?
To be honest, I went to those islands now, oh gosh, maybe, I think it must be at least 15, 16 years ago, something like that. And as I usually do, I wander around and I came across it completely by accident. The access to it in the forest was by a little more than an animal track. But it was a track that was clearly used and was not dangerous in any way. And I was just wandering around, and I'm always carrying my camera, and so I was simply on holiday, on vacation there, and I came across this thing in the middle of the forest, and I thought, well, this, what is it? In the middle of this forest, and so obviously I was curious, and then, as I say, when I started to walk up the path, I immediately twigged that there's something Masonic about this, and do the usual, take the photographs, all the rest of it, and then do a bit of research after that. But it was purely by accident. There was, I think one of my friends had said there was an unusual structure in the forest, but it wasn't a Masonic structure at the time. So yeah, pure fluke, nothing other than that.
Okay, thank you, Bob.
Thank you all. I think this is very interesting format to share not only Masonic history or stories, but also remember some persons who have left some legacy behind them. And as you started your lecture, you said that we don't really pay too much attention to the person's uh, personal legacy, what this person or that person sees in Freemasonry, how he feels and how he expresses that feeling. So again, why not knowing more about one more Scottish man who went wandering around the world and made his fortune, trying to, as the father fantasized maybe about these ideas, left something for his sons and family. And why not? It is interesting to look at it as from an ethnical point of view as well, and knowing more about each other's culture. That is also part of what Freemasonry is about, I think, in the sense that how we can grow our brotherly chain, if not understanding some peculiarities, some ethnical elements might give the flavor of Freemasonry there. So this was very interesting story for me to listen to, and maybe one day one can go there. It's not the, let's say,
It's
far away
it's
from Canada part.
yeah,
It's there.
it's not hard to get to. It's just a
San
long
Juan.
way, and a long way, and it takes time and obviously a little bit of money. So it's not difficult. But perhaps we should be contacting the guys in the Bellingham Lodge and see what their take on it is, what information they have. Is it something that we could go to? Mind you, they might want, they might not want the Masonic world descending on their little island in the middle of the summer and spoiling it all for them. But I mean, perhaps input from the Bellingham Lodge. I did try and contact them a few years ago, but I didn't get any answer. They probably thought, who's this madman from Europe wanting to know about
Uh,
what we
we got
do?
we got some explanation from David. By the way, estimated cost today's value is 650,000 US dollars. So that's the cost he paid back then to erect this interesting building.
And that was in its unfinished state, you know, his incomplete state. So goodness knows how much it would have cost had it been built. And you know, again, even the surrounding area might have been used for other things as well. We don't know. I mean, the man had money to burn. He really did. So he could have made something very grand out of not only the building but the land around it. But he was definitely a bit of a crackpot, there's no doubt. And from the locals, I hear he was a bit of a dictator because, I mean, he basically ruled the island because he was the only employer of any size anyway. So the locals don't have a terribly good memory of him as being something
really good.
Yeah. Well, that's right. He was the emperor of his own domain, if you like. So, but there we go.
So he was his own apotheosis, as brother already shared. So, and definitely he loved himself, I guess, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. A narcissist, but there we are. There we
well,
are.
we have our own. Nobody's perfect from that.
No. I mean, you can't judge. I mean, what he was thinking. You know, he everything he did, he probably thought he was doing for the best. You know, and I don't think he was an evil man, but it's just that he could do what he liked, basically, because of the amount of money,
of the resources.
Yeah, the money and power that he had. So there we go. And I mean, you know, just when we're talking about things, I mean, sort of Masonic references in the work of authors. So, I mean, Sir Walter Scott, for example, when we examine his work, he specifically refers to Freemasonry, maybe a dozen times throughout his various novels, but they're always for a purpose. They're not related to him. They're a particular artistic use or use in writing. So, and then you get people, obviously we know Robert Burns wrote a little bit about Freemasonry in his work. Walter Scott we've mentioned, certainly Rudyard Kipling did, and Mark Twain talks about Freemasonry a little bit, whereas others don't. I mean, I remember being at the Steinbeck Museum in California, and just as you go in the entrance, there was a book that was owned by his father, John Steinbeck's father, and it has a large square and compass on the cover of the book. So I spoke to the museum staff and said, you know, this belonged to the father, and quite common in Freemasonry for the son to follow in the footsteps of grandfather and father. So was John Steinbeck the author, you know, Grapes of Wrath and all the rest of it, was he a Freemason? And this museum member of staff was deeply offended at the suggestion that Steinbeck, you know, an icon of the American,
could have been a Freemason.
Yeah, could have. Oh, he was shocked, absolutely shocked at that suggestion, to the extent that, you know, the conversation, he just cut me off. You know, I had the temerity to even ask such a question, and you know, I was essentially sort of invited to leave. You know, I was just basically given the cold shoulder, and yet, you know, and I got the guy had given me his business card, and yet later on, my opposite number at the Grand Lodge of California found out that John Steinbeck was a Freemason. He had been initiated not in his father's lodge, but in a lodge that was further down the road from the family home. So I, you know, when I got them, the guys, just like I did for McMillan, I got the guy's membership card, John Steinbeck's membership card when he was initiated, passed and raised. And I wrote to this guy in the museum in Salinas in California. I just love rubbing their noses in it, you know, because of the way it treated me, you know. But I never got an answer, you know, never got an answer. But it was on Grand Lodge.
The guy quit the job.
Yeah. Well, but I said in the letter, you know, if anybody ever comes in and asks you if John Steinbeck was a Freemason, now you'll be able to tell them that he was. And by the way, here's his membership details, so that you know now that he was a Freemason, and you can't deny it, you know. And I asked him at the end of the letter, I said, I would be grateful if you would acknowledge or give me the courtesy of acknowledging receipt of this letter. And I never even got an acknowledgement that they'd received a letter, you know. I always promised I would go back there one day and try and find that guy and, you know,
look at his eyes.
Yeah. But you see, that's the problem, you know. We don't, in some ways, we don't make enough use of that kind of information, you know, to inform the public. So this is a member of the public poo-pooing the idea that Steinbeck would have been a Freemason, and yet he was. You know, there we go. Sorry.
Abraham wants to ask something or a comment. Abraham, please.
Yeah, just to further comment, you know, again, getting back to McMillan, it's probably just further testament to the fact that we're all unfinished Ashlers.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Good way of putting it. You're absolutely right. Yeah, it's we are all unfinished, that's for sure. And that's the nature of the human condition, isn't it? We're never going to be complete. So, but we've got to keep trying.
He clearly had many vices and superfluities he still needed to work on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there we go.
Well said. So right now I will ask for the final call if anybody wants to make any comments or questions. If not, then I'll just wrap up the meeting. And can I ask Abraham, you want to use the floor for the presentation?
For which presentation?
I mean, we've been discussing it for the next one, maybe during the next lecture.
I'm still working on my presentation, but
fine.
But yeah, we'll talk about that.
Okay, thank you. Then thank you very much, everyone. I will stop the recording. Once again, I will remind everyone that Brother Bob Cooper was with us, the curator of Grand Lodge of Scotland Museum and Library, and this initiative of lectures has been supported by Grand Lodge of Georgia, the English-speaking Lodge of Vilnius Arch from Grand Lodge of Lithuania, and all of you. Thank you. And with this said, I will just finish recording, close the live, and we'll keep the room open for next couple